Welcome everyone to the fourth meeting in 2020 of the Standards, Procedures and Public Appointments Committee. Now, we've got apologies today from Jamie Halcrow-Johnson and Mark Ruskell. So before we start agenda item 1, I'd like to invite Edward Mountain, MSP, who joins us today as substitute for Jamie Halcrow-Johnson, to declare any relevant interests. And Edward, do you have any relevant interests to declare?
Thanks, Convener. I don't actually have any relevant interest to declare on this, but I would like to make the committee aware of my register of interests, where I show interests in land, farming and inshore fishery and properties, none of which are relevant today, but just for the record, I'd like to place those interests on your record, Convener.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. That's very helpful. Thank you. All right then. So, first item is to for the committee to agree to take agenda item 3 in private. That's an item to consider the evidence that we're going to be hearing from the lobbying registrar. Do members agree to take this item in private? Okay. Thank you very much. So we'll move on to agenda item 2, and that is for the committee to take evidence from the lobbying registrar and the Scottish Parliament Lobbying Register Annual Report 2019, and to help us, joining us today are Billy McLaren and James Drummond. Welcome to you both, and thank you very much indeed for coming along. So I'd like to invite you to make a short opening statement, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener Committee. Good morning. So we thought it would be helpful if both James and I provide a little background first before we move on to the annual report. You may remember that the Lobbying Scotland Act 2016 was a Scottish Government bill, which all political parties passed in March 2016, so towards the end of session 4. Royal assent followed in April 2016, and from that point, responsibility for the implementation of the register passed to the Parliament, which is why we're here as Parliament officials. Now, lobbying, as we all know, is a fundamental part of our democratic process. It can take many different forms, but this particular act set out new legal requirements for certain types of lobbying. And to differentiate that from other potential types of lobbying, the lobbying covered under this Act is known as regulated lobbying. And regulated lobbying can be when businesses and organisations lobby face-to-face with yourselves as MSPs, with a member of the Scottish Government, so Cabinet Secretaries and the Scottish Law Officers, with a junior Scottish Minister, and with a Scottish Government Special Advisor. Now, lastly, and aside from the special advisors that I've just mentioned, the only civil servant covered by regulated lobbying under the Act is the Scottish Government's Permanent Secretary, its most senior civil servant. Now, not every conversation will be regulated lobbying. However, where businesses and organisations use the opportunity to inform or influence decisions about Scottish Government or parliamentary functions or other aspects in relation to your role as MSPs, then it's likely this will be regulated lobbying. And where that business or organisation engages in regulated lobbying, it has been legally required since the 12th of March 2018, when the Act was commenced, to submit that information to the lobbying register each time it does so, unless there's a specific exemption within the Act that applies. Now, this is done by means of submitting an information return, and each information return must be submitted no later than a set period of time. All information returns are assessed collectively by our team here in the Parliament before being published to the lobbying register. And once published, those details become part of this growing online public resource setting out where and when regulated lobbying has taken place and what issues were covered and where it happened. So essentially, it's a transparency initiative. Other registers exist across other parts of the world and to help to identify a range of information on lobbying activities and make that information publicly available.
So the Scottish Parliament's lobbying register is online and available to anyone free of charge at www.lobbying.scot. The headline tasks for us in 2016 were to procure, develop and deliver that web-based lobbying register. We also needed to consult, develop and approve the parliamentary guidance and the code of conduct for those that lobby MSPs. And this is set out in the first chapter of the annual report in detail, but very briefly to update members. With regards to the IT requirements, we carried out with parliamentary colleagues a full procurement exercise before appointing Northgate Public Services. This was in March 2017, with the aim of helping us build the website and the database that hosts the register. Now, we programmed in 6 months for that, and we managed to deliver it within timescale and to the specified budget. By delivering that on time, it allowed us to then run a 4-month trial period of the register before we went live in March 2018. In terms of developing the parliamentary guidance, we spent most of late 2016 and early 2017 consulting in person with as many stakeholders as we could and those that we believed would have an interest in the system. This consultation led to a key element of the guidance, which is known as the 5 key steps. I believe that's shown on page 7 of the annual report. This flowchart's been well received and it's used extensively as an aid to identify whether or not you've engaged in regulated lobbying as defined by the Act. And it forms a key part of the more extensive parliamentary guidance that we've developed. Now, turning to the annual report, I'll just recap for the committee that it also covers the following. The external working group, which we set up to get a broad range of stakeholder views and developing the more detailed parliamentary guidance. The external research which we commissioned, this was to help us get a better handle on best practices from other parts of the world and the likely lobbying participants. Also covered our launch campaign and the branding development that we had and our engagement with MSPs and Scottish ministers. Now, as the SPPA committee has expanded its remit this session to include lobbying, it has been key to all of these developments. The committee has taken evidence from us in the parliamentary guidance I've just mentioned and has led in the statutory requirements to consult the Scottish Government on that guidance before the Act was commenced. As lead committee, you also examined the parliamentary resolutions and the directions which sit alongside some of the provisions of the Act before being voted on by the Parliament as a whole. Now, although it's not a statutory requirement, we decided to produce this annual report and we are pleased to be with you again today to answer any questions on the report, which covers the first 15 months of operational activity. However, as we now approach our 2nd anniversary on the 12th of March, both Billy and I will be able to provide some updated figures from that report when answering your questions.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. It's very helpful. I'll just kick off. There's a few questions to come. Hopefully, they'll all be useful for all of us. But just to start off with, I mean, as you say, it's coming up in 2 years now since we were established. Have you got reflections on the scale that was expected at the time you were established and how that has come through and developed over that period?
Yeah, thank you, Convener. Yeah, well, the financial memorandum set out a wide-ranging figure for the number of registrants. So it was, from memory, 255 to 2,550. And we've, as you say, just coming up to our 2nd year, we're past that midpoint, if you like. So I think it's fair to say if that was an end point, and we're past the midpoint already, it's wider than we expected. We did, however, obviously the financial memorandum when it was produced was the bill as introduced and not the bill as finally emerged. So we did do our own work around identifying the number of potential registrants. We employed some external consultants to help us with the working group to try and figure out who those consultants, consultants and charities and lobbying groups and et cetera, all might be. And we thought about 1,000. So I think we're just shy of 1,200 now. So I think it's fair to say it's more than we expected.
Okay. And so on that basis then, you don't think that the registration process that's been established has actually inhibited people from registering? It's not put people in a difficult position when, you know, they have got a duty to register but they're not sure about how to do it, or there's difficulties in coming around with the registration. Do you think it's open enough for people to be able to use it effectively?
Yeah, I mean, we part of the work we did with the external working group was to figure out how we have an engagement strategy to engage with people. And one of our concerns, obviously, was people wouldn't know. If you take the 1,200 registrants that we're nearly having just now, 3/4 of them registered in the first 3 months. So we were very pleased with the initial uptake. I think it showed that we hopefully got our engagement strategy right. And then you've seen subsequent to that a dribble of people coming through. And James might have better numbers on where we are.
Yeah, yep. In terms of the active registrants that we have in the system, we have 1,189. That's resulted in over 10,708 information returns which have been published. And we still have about another 1,500 to 2,000 returns that are in the system in varying states of progress in terms of queries that we might have on these returns.
Okay, Thank you. Yeah, that's very helpful. Okay, Gil Patterson, please.
Thanks very much. Good morning, folks. I've got a couple of questions on costs, finances, and what you need to complete your job. So, could you tell me how have the costs establishing the lobbying register compared with the estimated costs identified in the financial memorandum accompanying the bill?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the financial memorandum sort of split it into two areas. So I'll cover IT costs perhaps first. I think the financial memorandum put in a bracket of 180 to 300,000 for set-up costs. We did it for less than 180,000. We set up the system and the first year of support for around 170,000. So in the world of IT and public sector, we're pleased that that was the case. We've obviously got ongoing costs and a long-term fixed contract, so we're pretty confident going forward that in addition to the set-up costs on the IT, we've got a long-term contract with fixed costs that we can manage, you know, in a way that's suitable to the public purse and without any real danger to escalation of costs. So yeah, I think again they were estimating at the beginning about how much a set-up cost might be, but we came below that. The other aspect, if you want me to go on, is to talk about staff costs in the financial memorandum. Or I don't know, you want me to cover that?
Yes, if you don't mind, that's one of the points that I was going to raise with you.
Sure. Now that's a slightly different picture because I think the financial memorandum had this correlation, if you like, between the number of registrants with the number of staff. Now we now have 4 staff. We started just James and I with 2. And I think that reflects the workload that we have. But there's an awful lot of additional tasks that I think have came about that weren't anticipated in the original financial memorandum. We have more compliance tasks, I think, than we probably anticipated. I think the legislation finally delivered, which is different from what was in the financial memorandum, means more work around the additional exemptions that were introduced. There's perhaps not enough consideration in terms of compliance. We've got separate statutory return periods which can make processes kind of difficult. We have a lot of work in chasing up returns and being proactive on registration. But I think the key point is that we took a decision, having gone out and consulted people ourselves, that we needed to provide feedback at the very beginning to these organisations. And that's a large part of what we do. I don't think we'd have the credibility that we would have if we hadn't provided people with feedback on returns. We still have quite a high deletion rate of returns. You know, it was roughly about 7% on average, but it jumped a little bit recently again, which shows that we are examining these and providing proper feedback to people and trying to weed out returns that clearly aren't regulated lobbying. And I think that's a large part of our job, and I think it falls upon the Parliament, having taken on this task, to properly explain to people what regulated lobbying is. And that's difficult. It has been difficult in the first 2 years to spread that word around as many organisations as we're talking about.
And so it would seem that the cost that you thought you were, or the Parliament thought you were going to incur is higher because of staff. Did that, were you able to make use of the fact that you made savings on the 180 to £300,000? Was that how you managed to do this?
I mean, I think the staff complement comes within the complement of the Parliament as a whole, so it's about allocating resources across the board. But yeah, I mean, certainly overall, because we didn't spend as much as you would have thought in the financial memorandum for IT costs, there has been some savings.
Yeah, but you're not under pressure in terms of going forward. That the parliamentary staff facility keeps you going. In other words, you're not asking for new or more resources to do your job.
I mean, we'd always ask for more resources because we've always got more to do.
Maybe I'll reframe that question.
I know. Exactly. I mean, one benefit of being embedding this in the Parliament is that we do have access to other parliamentary staff, and in busy periods we have taken advantage of that to try and work on discrete pieces of work that we can do, and that's been really appreciated by the dedicated team, the 4 of us, for that type of assistance. And we also have other, as you do as MSPs, we have other facilities within the Parliament for media, solicitors, etc., that we can call upon for that particular type of work. So we're well served. But I would say, in terms of resources, we have, like everybody else here, that runs the Parliament, have to work within that window. Yeah. But if we had to do more, then I think we're in a better position now than those who wrote the financial memorandum back in 2016 to assess what requirements would be.
So then it comes on to the other question, since it was a new venture for the Parliament and yourselves, that when it comes to the actual collection of the data and the robustness of the system itself, and I noted that you had said that the registrations are more than that was anticipated, up to 1,200 instead of 1,000. So has that capacity been built into the system itself, that itself is robust enough to take you forward?
Well, I mentioned the figures earlier in terms of what traffic we've had so far. I'd say, yes, going by the amount of registrations and submissions that we do process, the system so far we think is robust enough. As part of the team that handles this on a daily basis, we think the system is capable of handling the traffic it deals with. We look at our counterparts in the Republic of Ireland. They've been operating since 2015. They have over 40,000 returns on the system, so we would like to expect it to be able to handle the same levels of traffic. In terms of thinking about future-proofing the system, we've also worked with Northgate, the contractors, or IT contractors, sorry, to ensure scalability of the system, and that's really with the consideration to give to any review outcomes.
Thanks for that.
Thank you very much, Gavin. Thanks very much for those replies. Tom Mason, please. Thank you.
Yeah, you say you spent quite a bit of time reviewing the various entries and things. Does that imply that the parliamentary guidance is not up to fit for purpose? Or is it just that it's teething troubles at this stage?
The parliamentary guidance, we believe it's a helpful document. We wrote the guidance through interpreting the Act as it was passed, and that's really in order to make it accessible for those that are reading it, to make it easier for them to understand. And we always advise organisations to use the parliamentary guidance. We see that as being the go-to document for organisations to help them make a decision on whether communication is required. I mentioned the 5 key steps earlier. There's been a key flow chart for organisations in doing that. But in addition to that, we have the further explanation of what regulated lobbying is. We expand on what the exemptions are and what that might mean for organisations. And we also take part to make sure there's information on the functionality of how to use the system. In addition, we've also supplemented that guidance with common scenarios and FAQ documents for various scenarios. And again, this was really developed through external engagement with organisations that we've spoken to and the external working group that we used before the Act was commenced. And one of the other things that we've done recently as well, through some feedback we've had through the workshops that we carry out, is to create what we find is a more practical document for organisations. And that's really about how you actually submit an information return. So we think we've provided a good suite of guidance and assistance for organisations.
And what about the code of conduct? Is that worked out and fulfilled its purpose?
I mean, the code of conduct for lobbying yourselves was a requirement in the legislation. It kind of sat by itself. It's not specific to lobbying that's regulated lobbying, and there's no specific sanctions attached to it, but it had to be done. It was in the legislation, so we thought it would be quite useful. Other industry codes do exist, and they have their own set of sanctions that go alongside those. So we've seen the code more as a set of high-level behaviours, principles, if you like, for those people who lobby you. And in many ways, it mirrors the code of conduct that you have for MSPs. I think it's been helpful to have. I wouldn't say we've used it extensively. I think we use it from time to time, mainly to point out its existence. And it's certainly not been because of any evidence we've had of non-adherence to regulated lobbying. But I think it's useful, and a set of principles like this is handy to have.
And with the parliamentary guidance and the code, do you expect to review those in due course, or what's the status of those, or are they continually under review?
Yeah, we've no plans at this moment in time. We would be keen to see what any outcomes of any review are first before we updated anything. We do know there are some minor areas of the guidance that would benefit from an update, But any changes to guidance would come before the committee and before being sent to the government for approval.
Thanks very much, Tom. Thank you, Tom. And just on the back of that, Neil Finlay, please.
Oh, there's a reference in later questions to post-legislative scrutiny, but Tom has mentioned whether the guidance code of conduct is fit for purpose. I'm just wondering if there's any reflections on whether you think, given your experience, the Act itself has many major gaps in it or needs amended.
Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of feedback, and it goes back to even before when the Act was commenced. We put that in the annual report because we thought it would be useful to feedback and feed on, if you like, to the review committee some of the concerns that were expressed to us from the external working group and from stakeholders. We still go out and see people regularly, and the main ones are focused in that issues for review section in the annual report. I think that's probably a useful steer for them going forward, but it's not, of course, for us to say what the committee work plan should be or what evidence you should take. But I think these are key issues I would see that will want to be raised by stakeholders, and some of which cause us a little bit of administrative difficulty, which again contributes to some of the resources issues I was referring earlier to when replying to Mr. Patterson.
I'll come back in later.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for the answers there. Maureen Watt, please.
Thank you, Convener. Morning, gentlemen. I think, Billy, you mentioned the engagement that you've had with Ireland. Has there been any interest from any other jurisdictions on what we're doing here and them wanting to copy what we're doing?
Yep. Yeah. There's a European Lobbying Registrars Network. Okay. That was formed in 2018, and that was with the purpose of sharing good practice amongst the various European legislatures, and their counterparts. And Billy has actually participated in these over the last 2 years, so he'd probably be in a better position to tell you what is discussed and what we talk about at these networks. But we actually have the intention that we're going to host this year's one sometime in the spring or summer.
Yeah, I mean, it was an idea that came from my opposite number in Ireland, who herself comes from Canada, and there's a very good network of, because a very developed network in Canada of lobbying registers, and then nothing had been set up across Europe. So she very helpfully managed to identify various countries who have pieces of legislation which are similar to ours. And I think it's just that. It's about quite early days, but a chance to try and share and have a look at what we all do in different ways and different types of legislation that we operate under. And we also have presentations from people who are academics in this area and lobby groups in this area, so we can take on board as many views as possible really in our work.
So given that, are there maybe some things that with hindsight you might want to do differently? It comes back to Neil's point about post-legislative scrutiny.
Yeah, I mean, I think to be fair on the Scottish Government, they introduced as part of the legislation the review, the statutory review after 2 years. And again, just to look at Ireland, they have a statutory review every 3 years to make sure that the legislation's still in tune with what's going on administratively. So again, the issues for review section is intended to help our colleagues when they do that. And of course, we'll be available to provide further evidence or answer any questions that they have on the workings of what we've experienced really over the last 2 years, nearly 2 years. I think it's useful to have a review after 2 years of operation, and it's useful to have it in the core legislation and it will now take place.
Okay. In the annual report, you indicated that the majority of organisations obviously registered within the first 3 months. What rate are you still receiving new registrations? And I suppose my worry would be, given the flurry at the beginning and everybody knowing about it, in relation to new organisations, do you get the feeling that there are some that don't know about it and don't know that they have to register?
Well, we do proactively try to raise awareness with other organisations about the Act to consider whether they have to register. You did mention there that 75% of our total registrants were receiving that first 3 months. And we do still have a steady stream. I think we had 46 new registrants in the last quarter, but as of yesterday, I mentioned we were just 11 short of 2,000 organisations registered. But in terms of being proactive, we monitor media articles for any potential organisations. We review the published ministerial diaries again to see if any organisations are on these that we might need to contact. And we also liaise internally with our own events colleagues to flag up in advance any sponsored events or exhibition stalls in the Scottish Parliament. We make ourselves on hand to assist those organisations should they need assistance or any questions on whether they need to register.
And you gave us the figure of how many organisations you had to deal with, but you also said that there were still some in the system that you had queries about.
Yeah,
Could you also say that that's a backlog, or?
I suppose you could say it as a backlog. We have a number of queries because Billy mentioned the feedback that we like to go back with organisations to. We try to provide a consistent style and uniformity of what is the information that's contained in the information return. So it's an ongoing process to make sure these organisations kind of get used to what it is that they need to submit. So the feedback that we have, we send back a lot of returns for these organisations to consider these and also consider whether it is actually regulated lobbying. So it does build up that these are still in process.
Yeah, we proactively chase these returns, and our figures just now are we're publishing 2/3 within 7 days. The ones we do have queries on, we ask for returns within 2 weeks. We more than often have to chase that, sometimes once or twice. So I think that's something that we're working on with stakeholders to try and improve that turnaround time. And that's something to keep an eye on, for sure.
We're also in the process of our own internal audit just now to look at, as you said, what you would want to maybe call a backlog to try and get these organisations and historically clear any of these returns that are still outstanding.
So I suppose, people were anxious in the beginning to meet the register. Do you feel there's maybe a kind of levelling off, or people not so worried now about whether they have to register meeting folk or not?
No, I think, and then going back to Mr Mason's point, I think probably at the start people were just submitting anything because they were a bit scared that it's a new law. And I think some of the older ones that James is referring to, and we're finding, well, I certainly found when I was doing my section, the audit, that a lot of them aren't actually regulated lobbying. It's just getting them to confirm that to us so we can, delete the record. But it's a long, laborious process, and of course it's not a pick up the phone job, it's an email job, so we're relying on people getting back to us. So I think that again goes back to this issue about resources and the time taken for processes, and I do think that's been one of our biggest resource challenges, and I think we're getting to the point where we're catching up on that a little bit.
I think it also comes down to, you were asking about organisations registering, and it goes back to, again, one of the further other points about, is the guidance helpful? Now, I think organisations are reading the guidance. They are able to then make a decision that we don't need to register because there might be an exemption applied. So, again, I think that goes back to it being helpful for organisations.
So maybe you could confirm to me whether the senior campaigns manager of CAMRA needs to register speaking to his mother in the Parliament.
You're not the first person to raise an inter-family piece of lobbying with us, and we've had all sorts of examples given, but yeah.
He has to register, does he?
Well, I'll tell you, I won't say what the other example was, but we made the point that if you look at it conversely, that it actually shows, if you submit a nil return, for example, it shows that you haven't. So it kind of answers the question. Yeah.
Maybe he uses it as an excuse not to speak to him when he's in here.
Thank you. Okay, now we've got an electronic Christmas card, I think, that's been broadcast. Tom Mason, you had a wee bit in back of that.
Yes, just following on, what is the atmosphere like between you as a registrar and the lobbyers? I mean, are people doing it happily, or are they resenting it? Or, I mean, obviously this is, a judgment, but what's your view?
We maintain good relationships with everybody. That's our. I mean, we've had very little opposition to our feedback, for example, and I would say, on the whole, people are appreciative of getting the feedback that we provide, and we like to, we mentioned, and James mentioned earlier, that we went round and seen a lot of the registrants, potential registrants as they were then, before the Act was commenced. So we built good relationships with them, and we hopefully, using the working group, which is people, everybody from pro-transparency campaigner through to a major company like Scottish Power sitting on it, but we have to carry everybody with us on that. And I think probably just our ethos as a team is a new thing. It's difficult for a lot of people. The Act at times can be quite complicated, but that's why we're there, is to help. And I think that, I'd like to think that's appreciated, and I see no evidence to suggest that in most cases it's not.
Thank you. Okay, Neil, yes.
You got others to come in?
No, you go ahead.
All right, okay, thanks. Thanks. Just a few things. I mean, I remember way back to when I introduced my members' bill on this, and I remember being invited to the Association of Public Affairs, Scottish Public Affairs event to discuss the proposal to the bill, and they said that they had previously had First Ministers at their meeting, but they had never had quite a turnout as that. Now, that was not because it was me. I think it was a subject matter that was causing them great concern. But I'm very comforted by the fact that you're saying there isn't any great concern, because I think a number of the issues that came forward at that time, there was a shoal of red herrings unleashed about what this would mean. And from reading the report and listening to what you're saying today, most of them never came to fruition. So the idea that, first of all, there's not much lobbying goes on in this Parliament. A senior journalist said that to me, who had been in here from day one, and I couldn't believe it, because clearly the evidence is there's a huge amount of lobbying goes on. And that is essential for our democracy, that happens. It informs us and it informs the Parliament. So the register proves that there's a huge amount going on. The second thing they said was it would be too burdensome. This would be too burdensome. It would put people off engaging with the Parliament. Interested to hear your views on whether that myth has been dispelled or you do have some concerns. They also said it would be too complicated. People wouldn't understand it. Well, it appears that, people do understand it, and with a bit of help, they can get to grips with the system. I think you're absolutely right in pointing out the way in which yourselves as the team have approached this, because I think that's part of the reason it's went so well. And I'm sure you hoped that somebody would say that to you today when you came here, but I think it is. It's a very kind of open and helpful culture that you're running there. Particularly, I think, in relation to members, that most of us don't even know what's going on until we get a return every now and again saying somebody's matey. So it's no burdensome for us, and that again was some of the things that were being raised. In terms of going forward, I'm not sure if it's if you want to comment on this, but I'll raise it anyway. Issues around the small organisations exemption, I think, really have to be looked at by the post-legislative scrutiny through the audit committee, because there are small organisations that have less than 10 individuals working for them, but they're very powerful organisations and very influential, and I think to exclude them is wrong. The issue around only the permanent secretary being the only civil servant who is subject to this, I would like to hear your comment on that, because I think that is something that has to be looked at.
Can I just interrupt you? Sorry for a second, just to give them a wee chance to
Yeah,
catch up.
just one final point and then I'll finish. And the key one, I think, is only face-to-face lobbying. I think it is ludicrous in 2020, where we have all sorts of communications methods, that we only register face-to-face lobbying. Any comments?
Sure. I mean, I'll maybe tackle it back to front and deal with the review. I mean, as parliamentary officials, we are obviously carrying out the tasks that the Parliament sets, and our job in the last 2 years has been to make this as comfortable as possible for people in the legislation that's already been written down and set. I certainly welcome comments and debate on a whole range of issues when the review committee comes, and I'll be interested to hear what happens on those, and obviously we'll be interested as a team to see how developments go. Beyond that, it probably wouldn't be proper and correct for me to say much more, given it would go into political territory and I'm a parliamentary official. Thank you for the comments about the team. I'd like to echo that myself on record. That I've got a great team, and I'm very proud of the effort and dedication they've shown on what they've done. We're not perfect, but we try our best. Continued dialogue, as you mentioned. You mentioned the ASPA appearance that you had. Funnily enough, we're going along to see ASPA yet again, and I think continued dialogue is the key to that. I'm not saying that everything's perfect, and we've already highlighted some of the issues in the report, which the review committee might want to take forward. These are comments coming not just from us, but really from people on the ground. We've also made a recommendation, you might want to talk with us, James, about multiple returns, because there is some elements we think could be quite burdensome. But
yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that we do hear from organisations. We have these parliamentary events, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night, where an organisation might have the same conversation about a campaign that they might be running. So that conversation might take place 30 or 40 times. Now, as the Act requires, each instance of regulated lobbying must be recorded. So that requires its own separate instance. Now, we've tried to build in a wee bit of help and to aid organisations here with functionality of a create copy function on the system. So if they have had that conversation mimicked 30, 40 times over the course of a night, they create one information return and they can hit a button to create copy. So it populates the next information return with everything. So all you have to do is change the MSP or minister's name. So we appreciate there is a practical impact for organisations around that type of regulated lobbying and how this has to be recorded, and how it can be a burden for organisations, and that's for big or small organisations that might have to do this.
Okay.
Thank you.
So just one final thing. In terms of breaches and sanctions, has there been any?
yeah, I mean, there is breaches, and they're recorded in the annual report. I think at the end of period 2, so the large chunk, 186 registrants, 17% didn't submit any return by the 6-month deadline. Largely this is down to people not understanding they have to submit a nil return.
Yeah.
And I think we're working on the education of that. And I think we've improved better in terms of our messaging on that over the last 18 months. I'd like to keep an eye on that. I don't think it's a trend or a figure we'd like to have, say, 2 years down the line. I'd also like to keep an eye on whether there's any repeat of that, so people making the same mistake every 6 months. Largely we encourage people to not wait to the end. It's the classic tax return thing, isn't it? Everybody rushes to do it. We like to encourage submission of returns. Some people do it almost in real time. We've had people doing it like straight after the event, and that's, you know, it's fine. It suits us if things come in that way, but everybody's entitled under the law to do it in the way they wish to do so. So yeah, I think it's worth keeping an eye on. I mean, there's other ways we can you know, publish breach figures in the future. For example, there might be a way in which to put a little bit of perspective out there on how those figures are going. But I'm keen to get that number down.
But nobody's been sanctioned.
No, I mean, well, Jane might want to tell you a little bit about how we actually deal with it.
Yeah. When organisations do register, we give them a forecast of their dates rolling forward for each 6-month period. So again, in terms of being helpful, we want to make sure that they know what their statutory requirements are for deadlines. We do take a 3-step approach, I would say, to compliance when it gets towards the requirement for them to submit information returns before that deadline. So 2 weeks before the deadline comes up, we send them a reminder, and again reiterate what their deadline dates are for this period and going forward. Should we have not received any information returns, there'll be an email the day after that deadline to inform them that we're still awaiting something. And what would then come as well, if we'd yet to receive anything after a further 2 weeks, we would write to a senior person within that organisation to remind them that we have still not received a return and their requirements to submit something. And I think it's fair to say that if we have got to that point, then we're pretty successful after the letter goes to the senior person.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. And Edward Mountain.
Convener, thank you. It was just on a point there that came up as a result of Neil's comments about multiple entries and events in the Parliament, which you responded to. The only time I've had reason to challenge a lobbying note against me is when unfortunately, I said I could attend event and didn't attend event, and therefore somebody's registered I was attending and has been lobbied. I do wonder if you, I think in your report you make it clear, multiple returns, that you might like to look at that. I mean, I would encourage you to look at that because I think it puts a burden on, and I wondered if you could just build on that a wee bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it's work for us too, because if you think about if somebody managed to get around 30 MSPs at reception, that's 30 returns to process. And I suppose we're not in a numbers game here. It's not about how many returns there are. It's about the accuracy and conveying the information. And you know, without wishing to preempt any views of the review committee, I think that might be a sensible change. If it's just causing both registrants and us some work, then yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Can I just ask something about, obviously there's a trust element comes into things, and that includes people registering, which is and it does seem to have been complied with extremely well from what you've said. What about circumstances where people might be lobbied but the company or organisation hasn't registered? Because that can happen, I'm assuming. Is there a process for how that will be dealt with? If that's reported to you, do you get in touch with the organisation or company and tell them they can't be doing that? Or, I mean, is there a sanction or whatever? Because it's not as if people by now who are in those positions wouldn't know that you exist, actually, you know. So, I
mean, there is a legal requirement to register within 30 days of the first instance of lobbying. So if somebody was to lobby you, you know, today, they'd have 30 days from today to make sure they're registered and submitted a return, saying what that was. That's a legal requirement. Clearly in the early days, there's maybe a few who haven't managed it in time or whatever, but we keep a note of that. And now with lesser numbers of registrants coming through, we can keep a closer eye on and educate people as they come through the door on terms of, you know, you've got responsibilities here. I don't think anybody, with no evidence of anybody trying to evade, and if they do realise they've lobbied and they haven't quite registered yet, they're very quick to get on the system once we're in touch, or somebody's told them that they should register. I'm not finding any willful, you know, misbehaviour. Okay. And Maureen?
Finally, have you had anybody who said, oh, this is far too much hassle, I'm just not going to bother contacting members of the Scottish Parliament?
Not personally, no. I mean, there was some talk in earlier days about we won't lobby face to face. We'll just start doing it by, you know. I think people were being a little bit, you know, we'll just write or we'll just text or we'll just. I mean, that's a matter for how you lobby, and the Act is constructed now deals with face to face lobbying. So, if you want to be effective in your lobbying, then it's up to you to decide your strategy in doing so. But if you're going to do it under the terms of this Act, I haven't seen an awful lot of people saying, well, I'm not going to do it. No, I mean, it's probably better to talk to stakeholders outside about that, but nobody said it directly to me or to you, I don't think.
Thank you, Maureen. Okay, I don't think we have any further questions, in which case it's been absolutely excellent that you've managed to put people's mind at rest as quickly as that. Anyway, but, thanks for all the work you're doing, and thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And okay, that ends the public part of the meeting, and the committee will now move into private session. Okay, we'll give you 5 minutes just to settle.